Tonight, our guest speaker is Andrea Colvin. She is somebody I met a couple of years ago, and I immediately really liked her, and because she's super interesting to talk to, and I like people who are interesting to talk to. So I'm going to give you a short little bio about her. Andrea Colvin arrived at Little Brown Books for Young Readers in the summer of 2019 as the editorial director of graphic novel publishing. Before that, she was editor-in-chief at Lion Forge after having been vice president of content in the book division for Andrews McMeel, and where she co-founded the AMP line of middle grade graphic novels. And previous to that, she was director of publishing operations for Open Road Integrated Media, which does ebooks, I think, right, Andrea?
Yes, well, now they're essentially marketing, but
okay,
they've pivoted.
Okay, they've pivoted. As well as executive managing editor for Abrams, and you've also been an adjunct professor in NYU's graduate publishing program. So one really cool thing about you is that you've done many different roles within publishing, which gives you, I think, a really interesting vantage point. I'm very intrigued by the fact that you have worked at a comics publisher, you've worked at startups, you've worked in ebooks, you worked in medium-sized publishers, and now you're at one of the big 5 publishers. So I think you can kind of speak to many, many different parts of the industry.
Yeah, each one has been an incredible learning experience.
No. I don't know, I'm not gonna ask you to unpack that statement right now. So I'm gonna start right off with Little Brown. Okay. So tell us about what you were hired to do at Little Brown and what your vision is.
Okay, so essentially, sorry. Essentially well, first of all, hi, I just want to say hi to everyone, and I'm just browsing the participants list, and there are so many amazing people and people I know and whose work I admire on tonight. So I'm incredibly thrilled, and especially to see my own author, Jonah Newman. There he is waving. I feel like I actually spent the day immersed in Jonah's manuscript, so I feel like I know him really well right now. He's doing a YA memoir for Little Brown. So the way I got hired at Little Brown, I was at Lion Forge, which is, an independent comics publisher that recently merged with Oni. I'll unpack those air quotes at another time if anyone's interested. And when I sort of saw the writing on the wall there before the merger and realized that it was time to look for the next thing. And it was actually Callista Brill, who I'm sure many of you know, and is like one of the most amazing people in all of the world. We meet up did back when we could meet people for breakfast every once in a while. And I was explaining to her what was going on. And she was like, Andrea, it's time for the next thing. And so I just looked around at the big 5 publishers. This was, Penguin Random House had just brought Gina over to do Random House Graphic, and for a second was doing better than ever. And, there were rumors that Harper Alley was, about to come out. So I just started reaching out to people at Big 5 publishers and saying, this is who I am. And this is what I think about comics, and had a lot of great conversations with a lot of, it did get me a job at Little Brown, but it also, I just met some amazing, really cool people and had some really great conversations about comics, particularly kids comics. And Little Brown at, the time, serendipitously, was hoping to expand their graphic novel offerings. So they hired me essentially to build a kids graphic novel list there. And so now I'm doing that.
So tell me a little bit about how, is there anything you could say about how your vision is distinct? Like what?
So I mean, it's interesting because when you're in publishing and trying to build something, you have to, I mean, I say often that publishing is a business of killing your darlings, you know, and there are books and projects that I personally love that I wouldn't necessarily acquire, and I'm really glad that someone else is publishing them so I can read them. But essentially, I'm looking for really commercial graphic novels. I'm trying to, my list makeup, I want it to be 50% middle grade because that's what's working right now. That's the sweet spot. And then, 25% YA, which is an emerging category. And then another 25% what I'm calling early graphic novels. I know that there are different terms for them, but if you all can help me make early graphic novels stick, that would be helpful. And this is a market segment that's about to explode. Interestingly, what's like, think of the Narwhal and Jelly books. They're essentially sort of like really easy chapter books that are comics, or, Elephant and Piggy for the kids who are, a year older than that. Early GN's rock. Oh, someone's writing two of them. Nice. Oh, sorry. It's hard for me to talk and look at the chat at the same time. You're going to have to tell me if there's a question I should stop and answer. So those are essentially like 64 to 96 page, chapter book, fun comics. And I've been saying for a while that we need something to bridge the gap between picture books and middle grade, because that is sort of the gap in which we move kids away from reading images. In picture books, they're generally read alouds, but the images are readable as well. So kids are used to sort of inferring part of the story from the images. And then we push them into prose, which is great. Prose is also great. And we decorate it with images to sort of like, it's like putting the spinach in to keep them excited. But we're realizing now that there is, some real benefits to, visual literacy. And a lot of kids sort of fall out of that when we push them into middle grade prose. So now this is sort of this new area where, they can continue to read things that develop both their textual and visual literacy. So now people are figuring it out, and it's happening, and there are gazillions. I've been keeping track of the announcements, so I'm sure there are more that I don't know about. But for instance, hold on, I've got, I have this screenshot up of various covers. So there's, okay, just coming this year. This is just, in fact, can I just share, can I share my screen?
Yeah, oh, hold on. I think I have to give you the ability. So yes, now you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, can you guys see this? This is just like a few covers of early graphic novels coming out this year. One of my favorite things is that I know both of these creators, lovely people, PB and J, Peanut Butter and Crackers, completely different publishers.
Oh, wow.
There's a little bit of a theme here. It's animal or inanimate object friends, sort of like fun blue-green covers, friendship stories. They're very silly, but there's sort of a lesson to them. Okay, I will stop sharing that so I can see you all again. But it's, and those are just this year. So we don't really know how well they're going to do yet. I mean, we're basing everything essentially on Narwhal and Jelly, and that CC Bell one, Chicken Brain. But, people are paying good money for them, and we will see. Another category that people are paying good money for is so far not, completely unproven is YA. But, I, I've again been saying for years that, you know, who I call Raina's readers, the people who have been, you know, reading Raina's books for years are growing up and want to still read comics. And I think there's finally probably enough of a critical mass of those readers that they're just moving right into YA. YA books are, graphic novels are definitely getting amazing sort of critical attention. But the sales right now are nowhere near what middle grade is. But don't think about that if you all are creators and deciding what to do. Just do the thing that works for you, because
Yeah.
all of this stuff are definitely going to be there within the next few years.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. So all of you guys, I'm going to have a Q&A at the end, and I know you are going to have a million questions, but I do have a bunch of questions that I think are very relevant to most of the people here, because when I did this masterclass that I taught like a month ago, I got so many questions from people. So I have like a giant spreadsheet full of graphic novel creator questions that I know Andrea can help out with. So the first one is, can you just sketch out what's the basic editorial process for a graphic novel? Kind of take us from submission to published book.
Okay, sure. So submission can happen a few different ways. I think probably at Little Brown, I have no idea how many books I've signed up so far, but it's a substantial number. And I think about half of them have been unagented. So, you know, I'm sure everyone's heard a lot about how the agent process works. And Big Five publishers generally don't, you know, accept submissions that are unagented. You know, it's an emerging category, and I am more than happy to accept unagented submissions. And some of my favorite books that I'm publishing right now have either, you know, like, for instance, there's one I'm doing called Shark Summer. It's probably going to be the first of my acquisitions to be published by someone named Ira Marks, who I had turned down a project of his when I was at Lion Forge. And then when I was between Lion Forge and Little Brown, he started emailing me, and I happened to have the time to sort of respond. I try to respond, but, you know, I also have to edit the books. You know, I gave him some feedback, and he was like, here's some ideas. And it was just enough where I was like, no, hey, this one's intriguing. And we went through that process like 4 or 5 times. He developed an amazing pitch, sailed through acquisitions, and you know, he's finished inking it now, and I'm just really, really excited about it. It's an amazing project. And he was unagented. I try to go to, like, I've done things at SVA and at SCAD and try to meet students or graduating students. I think that's a great way to find talent. I also like to go to, when I can, because when they exist, small independent comics conventions to just sort of meet people and connect with people there, you know. I mean, these days, a lot of them already have book deals. I also do a lot of looking for people on the internet. A way that I do that, and I'm sure there's a better way, because I'm like super bad at social media. Like, I need people to read the internet and tell me what it says. But, I do find a lot of artists through Twitter. So I do this by, you know, going to artists I know and seeing who they follow, and then, you know, seeing who follows them. And I highly recommend, if you're an artist, having a link to your portfolio in your Twitter bio. Like, don't make it too hard. And then, you know, and there's those hashtags, like, I'm not going to remember what they are. People tell me when they're happening, and I go and search the hashtags, like Portfolio Day, or, you know, Artists of Color Day, or you know, Women Artist Day, and I just go and look at the things people post. And I often reach out to people when I see like a short on their website or something and ask them if they're interested in turning it into a larger book. I've signed up a number of projects that way. So that's one way I find projects. Another way is through agents. Agents submit them to me. Jonah, for instance, has an agent who I've worked with before, and he submitted Jonah's book, and there was an auction. That's always like both exciting and terrifying for everyone involved. I guess are people interested in how auctions work, or does
Go
everyone?
ahead. Go ahead. Sure. Yeah.
It's something, you know, this only happens when you have an agent, because the agent will sort of, you know, send your pitch out to a number of different publishers. If a lot of people are interested, they'll set an auction. There are all sorts of different auction terms, but everyone sort of comes to the table and they're like, I want this, and I'll pay this much and do this in marketing. And, you know, you usually try to have a conversation with the creator too, to see if you buy. And, you know, and you compete for the project. They can be really heartbreaking. But anyway, so, and then the acquisitions process, I know it's different at, you know, a lot of different publishers, but Little Brown has an acquisitions meeting, you know, and the board is made up of, you know, the editorial leadership staff. You've got publicity, marketing, sales, and our creative director is there. And, you know, the editor brings things in and they say why we think we should publish it. A big part of that is, and this sales always wants to see this, is identifying comp titles, which are essentially the titles that are already in the market that we think it will sell like, or people who read this book will definitely want to read this book that I'm pitching. That can be really hard with graphic novels because it is an emerging category. And of course, you can't comp anything to Raina's books anymore, because, you know, we should be so lucky. But, you know, it's also tough because, you know, I always say too, like the next big thing is something that we haven't seen yet. You know, I mean, when Smile happened, it was, as Janna well knows, it was, you know, a mini and a webcomic about orthodontia. You know, when Wimpy Kid happened, you know, there was nothing else like that. So it's, you know, when something is like really a, you know, gonna be like that caliber, we're not necessarily gonna recognize it when we see it, and there aren't gonna be comps for it. So that can be tough. But somebody just asked, do I only look at submissions by author illustrators? Not at all, although I do like them the best, just to be completely candid. A lot of times from agents, I'll get just a script or a pitch from a writer. And I will acquire those, but reluctantly, like they have to have something really special about them. Like the author is, you know, an established creator and known quantity. Although I will happily look at projects where the author and illustrator have come together and they're bringing me a pitch as a duo. But no, I don't accept only submissions from agents. I'm going to stop looking at that because I'm going to get confused and just answer those questions. Anyway, so then we get into the editorial process, and it's totally different for every creator. It's just completely different. And I feel really strongly in working with that creator's process. Some people write a script, like a script, Jonah, for instance. Some people don't. Some people do a synopsis and, you know, they actually write in thumbnails or sketches. Some people do thumbnails, some people don't. It's kind of all over the map, and I'm never going to make anyone sort of change their process to conform to just something, you know, that someone else has done. And that's been, I think, coming over to Little Brown, that has been one of the biggest learning curves for me and for everyone at Little Brown, because it's, you know, it's been a while since I've worked at a really big company, and they are very process oriented. And it's been super tough for me to show up, you know, and be like, oh, there's not going to be a script. You know, you don't have a Word document to send to the copy editor. And they're like, what? And then, you know, they'll say, it takes 4 years to make a graphic novel. And I'm like, no, it doesn't, you know, and it doesn't. But, you know, we also do things much earlier because there's this whole PR and marketing machine that gets started earlier. So that's a whole thing. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, so tell me a little bit just about the range of time that you're seeing with the projects you're working on right now, in terms of from the moment you acquire it to the pub date. Is it usually like 2 years, 2.5, 3?
It really depends. It depends. I mean, as you all probably know, some people draw a lot faster than others, and that just is what it is. Sometimes it's a year and a half, which is, when I was at Lion Forge, that was like normal. But now that I'm at Little Brown, they consider that like a crazy crash rush. But it can be up to 3 years. You know, I certainly have on my list lots of projects that, you know, I've got things on my projects on my list through 2025 right now. So, you know, it really depends. I mean, I don't believe in publishing books before they're ready. And the great thing about showing up at Little Brown is that, you know, they didn't have a graphic novel list. So there wasn't this sort of like, we have to, you know, make this much revenue in graphic novels this year, and that means you have to publish this many. So it's really, I'm just building the list and publishing them when it makes sense to publish them, which is generally, I mean, makes sense from a creative standpoint.
Can you say a little bit about the difference between, or I guess what I should say, are there any advantages to publishing at a house that is not a Big Five publisher?
You can be the darling, you know, if you're, you know, a bigger fish in a small pond. I mean, obviously there are pros and cons. I would say that's sort of the big pro, is getting a lot more individual attention, and also working with a publisher that can be more nimble. I mean, when we were at Lion Forge, we could do all sorts of stuff that we can't do at Little Brown because we're like, you know, moving the Titanic.
Mm-hmm.
And there we could, you know, move things around, be really nimble, you know, do advertising, you know, right up to the deadline. And I guess that would be the, you know, the big advantage. There are lots of advantages to working at a smaller publisher as an editor, if anyone is interested in that. I mean, I really think that I wouldn't have been able to, you know, when I started, the last Big Five publisher I worked at, which was maybe close to 20 years ago, was Penguin, before it was Penguin Random House, and I was in managing editorial. So I was not an editor, you know, I didn't do comics. I worked on, you know, like mid-market adult prose, smut. It was smut. And I don't think I would have been able to pivot my editorial career the way I have if I hadn't worked at small publishers. There's just a lot more room for growth at small publishers, and there's a lot more opportunity for people who, you know, just want to learn different things and take on more responsibility.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You can make a note in the chat, are there any people here who are interested in working at a publisher or who do work at a publisher? That would be really cool to know. So like I told you in the email I sent you, Andrea, I've gotten a lot of questions about how to penetrate the publishing fortress. And I think you've actually talked about some of that already. But one big question, you alluded to the fact that you're not the greatest at social media. I'm also not the greatest at social media. But I know a lot of people worry and they think that they have to have a certain platform in order to be have their project acquired by a publisher. So what would you say about that regarding creators?
You do not. I mean, have signed up books by, you know, young debut, very, 25-year-olds who have zero social media. I mean, for me, it's about the project. That is more specific to children's publishing. It's about, they call it a Little Brown, and maybe this is a Big Five thing, they call it the read. It's about the read more than it is about the platform. I mean, it definitely doesn't hurt. I mean, when we go into acquisitions, the marketing person will say, these are, their social numbers and they're active and they do this. It's great to be able to find and engage readers, which is why people who do webcomics, are great. And it's why webcomics people get book deals too, because they already have this audience that they've generated for themselves. But it's absolutely not necessary.
So another question, I think I saw some people asking this in the chat, which I've actually heard a lot, is you said that you prefer projects that are author artists together, but I know there are a lot of writers who are interested in doing graphic novels. Do you have any advice for people who are just wanting to write?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely do it. My advice is when you put together your pitch, one thing that I think is really helpful is to put in some artist samples. And they can be like pie in the sky people who you might not be able to get, but it gives the editor and then in turn the acquisitions committee a sense of what you envision the look and feel being. When people don't do that, what I'll often do is do it myself before I take it to acquisitions. And it tends to really help because remember, I mean, you're dealing with people without an imagination, I always say. I mean, I hope none of them are on here. Many of them have an imagination, but you have to really show them what they're going to get, even if it's not the same artist, they're very different art styles out there. So I think that really helps. And it's also helpful to the editor to know what you're envisioning.
Okay. So one other question I have, let me just make sure I got everything I wanted to ask. Because I know you guys have a lot of questions, so I want to turn it over to everybody who's here. The last question, I guess, would be, what should creators expect their agent to do versus what they can do themselves to help their agent sell a project?
I mean, this one's a little tough for me because, I've never had an agent, so I'm not involved in that sort of part of this, and I wonder, I see some people I know on this call who I know have agents. Mm-hmm. Can we ask someone?
Yeah.
Like Frank or Greg or Jonah, I see you and I know you have agents.
What was the question?
Oh, you're not paying attention, Frank?
I want you to restate the question, please.
So the question is, what should creators expect their agent to do versus what they can do to help their agent sell their project?
Give them what they ask for. I mean, I know my agent will have me submit things to her first and will give me a brutal critique. So she will not submit anything unless she has okayed it first. So she doesn't submit anything that basically she doesn't submit anything she doesn't think she can sell. So that's how I read it. So, and it's tough because you can, that's the person closest to you. It's kind of like mom or dad saying, this stinks,
Yeah.
But it's better than wasting everyone's time,
Yeah.
wasting Andrea's time, wasting the agent's time, wasting everyone's time. So, but that's, but I don't know. I mean, different agents are, if they're used to doing graphic novels, that they're probably, they probably know what they're looking for. Some agents do a little of everything. And I don't know if graphic novels are a different beast, right? I mean, it's not the same thing as selling prose, and it's different, it reads different, it's a different animal. So
Yeah. And Frank's agent is known for making sure that they're very sellable when she sends them around. And then I know, Greg, your agent does prose and graphic novels, right?
My agent is new to graphic novels. I'm her first graphic novelist. We haven't sold anything yet. But when I signed on with her, I asked her what my responsibilities were. And her answer was make work, write books, come up with ideas. And it's been a challenge for me just sort of putting my faith in her to do what needs to be done. She knows that side of the business better than I do. Everything I thought I knew, I was wrong. So I've learned a lot about how many editors you can actually submit to at a time at a certain publishing house, which houses the doors close once an editor has seen it there, how the feedback process works and when you resubmit or don't resubmit. So that's all stuff that I've been learning. And I just am working on a new pitch now that I've sent to my agent, and she's going to look it over. As Frank mentioned, she's going to give me notes, and we'll put something together before it goes out, something that we're both confident in, that we're both comfortable with, and send it on its way. So for me, it's all still very new. I've only had this agent, it'll be, like a year this month.
Mm-hmm.
So still new, still learning.
She's a good one. You got a good one.
I like her. I like talking to her. We vibe very well, which is good. That was a major criteria for when I selected her. I was very fortunate. I had two agents that wanted to rep me, which I know is not common. Mm-hmm. And then after asking a ton of questions, I picked the one that made me most comfortable.
I think that's a really important point, like vibing with your agent. I mean, Frank's agent I personally absolutely adore her, and she's actually helped my career a lot. Frank's agent, she got me my job at Lion Forge, full disclosure, but she doesn't vibe with everyone. So, it's got to be someone that, you're open to how the relationship is going to work. And I wonder if I can, continue to take this over. Joan is in an interesting position because he's an editor and he has an agent and he's doing a graphic novel. So, I mean, and as an editor, you probably could have submitted this yourself without having an agent.
Being an editor helps for sure, because I already sort of knew how to position it and where it could situate in the market. And, I've been in an acquisitions room a lot, so I sort of know what they're looking for. My agent also made a really good suggestion, and he told me to do what he called a pitch deck, which is basically like a short PowerPoint that lays out the story. It's got like an elevator pitch, it's got a brief plot summary, it's got some art samples, it's got some character descriptions. You know, and it's all, and I put it together in hopefully a visually appealing way. And I thought that was a really strong piece of my submissions package. You know, but, and I already did have sort of a list of editors in mind working in the industry, but my agent also came up with a bunch more that I didn't know, a lot of whom ended up bidding on it. So that was really helpful too. You know, and then he offered some initial editorial feedback, as many agents do. And then finally, you know, we're at the stage now where the contract's being finalized. And one of the great things about having an agent is you know, often the agent comes with sort of a legal team or at least someone, a colleague that they work with, you know, who knows a lot about publishing agreements and can help you as a creator get the best possible deal, and you know, and sort of make sure that you're not signing something that you're not, that you don't really understand. I mean, you know, it's not really expected that creators will understand publishing contracts, so the agent takes care of that for you a lot of the time, and that's a really helpful thing. So I love my agent, and you know, I've gotten sort of a lot of different benefits out of that relationship.
You know, I will say, to take my editor hat off and just my like what's best for you hat on. I mean, as an editor, I really hate it when I'm talking to someone and we're, you know, they've got a great project and I want to sign it up, and then they go out and get an agent because I know the agent's going to come in and like renegotiate offer, and it's very irritating to say the least. But also, it is true that you will always get a better deal if you have an agent. I mean, for one thing, your agent is going to negotiate on your behalf a lot better than you're ever going to be able to do it yourself, mostly because you're not an agent and you're a creator and you're, you know, sweet and nice and want to do the book. So, you know, but I've also been in situations where agents have come really close to sinking the deal for their client just because they didn't read the situation correctly. So, you know, there are a lot of pros to having an agent, but you don't need one to get a book deal certainly in kids' graphic novels.
I think we should let people ask questions. There's so many people here, and I know some of you must have questions. So you know what might be helpful is, can you use the raise hand feature in the participants tab? If you click on participants, there should be a raise hand feature. Okay, Nadia?
Yes, hi everyone.
Hi.
I'm a writer, and I have an agent, and I have a picture book coming out in fall 2021. But the manuscript that I wanted to turn into a graphic novel, I'm not an artist, so my concern is, you know, how do I present it in a way that'll be palatable for an editor like yourself who may not be interested as much, since I'm only one side of the puzzle. And also I wanted to ask if it would be good to also provide like a beat sheet, because I started putting mine together with the element of a beat sheet and a manuscript. And I really liked Jonah's idea of the PowerPoint presentation, but since I don't do art, I mean, do I draw the art as like stick figures? Like, what would be the best way that you would recommend, you know, I pitch a graphic novel in that format?
So I always say, you know, the best pitch, even if it's, you know, just from a writer, is, you know, a full synopsis. You know, I like sort of a log line, like what, you know, it's going to be like the beginning of the flap copy. Character descriptions are great. And if you're a writer, then I want, either a sample of a script, or if it's a short book, like a full script. And, you know, again, some ideas of what you think the art should look like. Definitely not stick figures.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Manuel?
Yes, how you doing? I just have a question as far as you said you were also looking at some YA titles, right? About 25% of what you're looking for is YA. I've heard that a lot, but I don't understand. Sometimes I get confused about what YA is to you as opposed to like what I would consider on the street level. You know, like a lot of YA people are like freaking talking about you know, mangas where, you know, people getting their heads blown off, and that's considered YA to them, right? Because they ain't no hardcore sex scenes, right? Whereas, you know, YA and like big industry publishing might be something like, you know, a Percy Jackson joint. So I just trying to figure out what's that look, because we work on a whole bunch of YA titles, and you know, ours is more leaning toward the manga style productions, and you know, not the you know, teenage kid with special powers, you know, type thing, you know.
So I've noticed that a lot of people who come from like the comic side of, you know, the publishing industry use the terms YA or all ages to mean anything that's for younger than adults. In kids publishing, middle grade is generally 8 to 12-year-olds. So it's usually elementary school, not middle school. And then YA, depending on sort of the level of content, can be, you know, 12 to 18, 14 and up. But some of the, I mean, one of the main differences is that middle grade doesn't have sex and drugs, right? It can have, you know, scary situations and put characters in jeopardy. It can have crushes, but there's generally no, you know, like dark topics like that. YA can tackle, you know, a lot of those topics. One of the things that we have to be careful about when we do graphic novels is that we're doing it all visually. So, you know, it can be easy to veer into soft porn or to sort of glorify alcohol and drug use in a way that it's easier not to do in prose. So you have to be careful about that. But yeah, when I say YA, I'm essentially thinking books by and about teenagers. And sometimes kids in their early 20s as well. You know, right now we're sort of looking for, sorry, I just saw Fred's, I'm gonna stop looking at that, pitch decks with clip art. I feel like it's only like TV people do stuff like that, Fred. Anyway, so there's that space, like when you graduate school, either high school or college, but sort of real life hasn't really started yet, and you're sort of, you know, you're adrift and you're trying to figure it out. I'm definitely looking for books that fit in that space right now, because there aren't that many of them. I think Bloom is one that sort of fits there, from For a Second, that fits there pretty well. But I hope I answered the question.
Rivka has some specific examples of YA in the chat.
This one summer is like, you know, the big one. We still get to use that as a comp, and we comp it all the time. Oh, here's an interesting tidbit. I did this presentation for students at SCAD like a month or so ago about the state of the kids graphic novel market. And I had, you know, I had this sort of presentation left over from when I was trying to get a job. And, but I, you know, so I had sales figures for a bunch of middle grade novels, a bunch of YA graphic novels, a bunch of YA graphic novels. And I went and updated the sales figures for, you know, it had been like maybe 6 months. And interestingly, this one summer, almost 20% of the sales of this one summer had happened in the past 6 months. So that book's been out for like 6 years. And so, you know, it's really starting to take off. And a lot of the YA books, the sales were really starting to take off. We've got high hopes, Jonah. And another category that's, you know, the sales are really starting to tick up is graphic nonfiction. And by that, I mean, memoirs is huge in graphic novels, but I mean, essentially non-memoir nonfiction is really ticking up as well.
Harold? Oh, sorry. You can, sorry.
Can I follow that up real quick? Would historical retellings be considered in that category as well? Because, you know, some of the history is just simply not 100% in there, right? You know.
Well, you know, I mean, it really depends on the adaptation. You know, I mean, I'm working on a project now that's about the Salem witch trials that was pitched as middle grade, but it's come out YA, you know, and that's just the way the story's been told, so.
Harold?
Hey, Andrea. I had a question for you. I don't know if it's fair to ask, but I'll go ahead and put it out there. If there's any way you can help kind of shade this for us, because you mentioned that you'll get a better deal with an agent. And obviously you, when you're acquiring this and you're working with a whole team of people who have to figure out what's going to work for you as a publisher. And you want a long-term relationship with these people that you're working with, that it's going to work for everybody. Can you kind of shade that a little bit more in terms of, say, from the artist perspective, what they gain and what they give up if they try to do it on their own? Because obviously the agent gets a percentage and they're usually more than worth what they bring to the table. But just for insight for us as artists, from your perspective, having worked with both sides, how much of a difference does it make if you're, you know, going with an agent or on your own?
I mean, it really, you know, it really depends on the project. You know, some projects, it's not going to make that much of a difference. You know, and the thing is, and I'm sure you all have looked at the Publishing Paid Me. Have you guys talked about that, Janna?
I didn't hear a word. I missed a word you said.
The Publishing Paid Me spreadsheet, you know.
Oh, yes. That was on Twitter, or yes.
Yeah, so you can really get a sense of the vast range of, you know, the kinds of deals people are getting. I saw someone on Twitter that I go on to almost none and keep talking about, say, you know, a 200-page graphic novel should be worth X amount, and there should just be like a scale. But that's, you know, your 200-page graphic novel, you know, about the Salem witch trials, and your other 200-page graphic novel, you know, about playing on your baseball team when, you know, and being a gay kid. I hope I'm not outing you. It's in the book on the, you know, and whatever, dealing with toxic masculinity, are going to sell very differently. They're going to sell to different markets. You know, the marketing plans are going to be different. You know, the upside is going to be completely different. So, you know, what the publisher is willing to pay to acquire that is going to be completely different. Your agent will always basically push the publisher to the edge of what they're able to pay. So that's, I mean, they're certainly worth their 20% or whatever they're getting. And they will also negotiate things that you won't even think of too, like royalty escalators and, you know, awards bonuses and just, you know, things like that. They'll get you to, you know, say you want a color flatter and have that built in. And, you know, they're nice people generally, not all of them, but most of them.
Is there any, I guess, when someone's dealing with an agent or dealing directly, do you have any tips for those people who are working directly, so that they kind of know that they're doing right by themselves if they're on their own?
Negotiate. I mean, ask for more. Ask if this is like the best you can do.
Get a lawyer.
Yeah, I mean, definitely have a lawyer. You're right. Look at the contract when you get it. I've definitely had people where I've negotiated a deal with them, and then when I sent them the contract, they freaked out and got an agent to negotiate the contract. Doesn't always work out that well, but you know, definitely, I mean, publishing companies, particularly big ones, aren't, you know, we have to deal with a lot of contracts and a lot of authors, and we're not there to kind of, you know, do things that are unfair. Everyone's trying to protect their own business interests, though. So just remember that.
Thank you.
Tim?
Hello, hello.
Hi.
Did I successfully unmute? Great.
Yes.
Hi there. So I have a background. My background is in design and art direction, recently illustration, and hopefully soon in the works, authoring. Primarily, I've been seeing myself in the picture book space. In fact, I should mention that my husband has been writing stories too. So it's also our goal and plan and dream to be a husband and husband team doing that together. As we're shaping up some stories, I'm seeing that his style of writing is a little bit longer than mine. So taking into account things like Narwhal and Jelly that are kind of graphic novel style for very, very young reader, very light on text, do you see picture books that might be a little bit too long in prose for picture books to fall into a graphic novel style, or is that just some weird nowhere zone that I'm kind of creating in my head? I guess I'm wondering where the delineation is for you between picture book that uses panels on occasion and really young graphic novels.
Right. So for me, the difference is, and I'm a big fan of picture books that use, you know, panels and, you know, comics, you know, visual devices, is that a picture book is generally being read to a child, and early graphic novels, ideally, the child is learning to read themselves. So the text can be different. I also, just when you're talking about long picture books, I just have to say, just cut it. Picture books should be like poems. You know, there can't be a word there that is not there for a really important reason.
Right, which is definitely my style, but my husband?
So stop writing.
His last project was a YA picture chapter book. Okay. So and he's a brilliant guy, and he reads Shakespeare for fun, which I can never get my head around. So that's where that difference between us is. You know, mine tends to be a little bit more humorous and very, very brief. So that's, you know, I'm just trying to figure out how I can make that work and see if it really is something that's pitchable as a graphic novel, or is it really just primarily picture book, and we need to separate those. I mean,
not reading what it is and not being, you know, not knowing their topic, I would say separate them. I mean, you know, I do say a lot that, like, you know, create what you're creating and let the editor or the publisher figure out who the audience is. Mm-hmm. But you may be creating something for which, you know, there is not an audience, right. Or at least, you know, one that we figured out yet.
Yeah. Thanks.
Subtitles can be really helpful too, like in terms of getting ideas of what's working in the market. Because mm-hmm. I do feel like there's just so much innovation happening in visual storytelling right now. So the lines are blurring so much between, you know, illustrated chapter books and graphic novels and picture books, and but you still have to know what's working and what's workable for the audience. So looking at what's doing well, what's successful right now, that's maybe innovative in terms of that area that's between picture books and middle grade graphic novels, it's probably a good idea.
Sure, and I think that this as a solution that we're starting to see is that to eliminate this heavy text on a page, adding the panels is eliminating a lot of the text. So that's where that trade-off is maybe happening for us. So thank you.
Cool. Tintin?
When an editor acquires a project or is interested in a project, does the project have to be ready to go, or does the editor acquire it with a view to, you know, this can still be polished, this can still be shaped into something I can sell?
Very definitely the latter. In fact, editors, and I think agents will often tell creators not to finish their project, you know, so that the editor can get their little hands in there and help collaborate and develop it and give feedback. I think this is particularly true of graphic novels because, you know, once you've drawn an entire graphic novel, you don't want to go back and take feedback and change things. So, you know, I mean, things go to acquisitions in all sorts of states of completion. I think with prose novels, they are much more likely to be finished when they go to acquisitions. I don't really like to acquire completed graphic novels. In fact, I've only done it once, and it was amazing. So.
But in script form, the script has to be at least complete? Like, no, it doesn't, it's not a requirement.
No, not at all. I mean, I need enough to know that you can write, and I need a full synopsis. Like, I need to know everything that happens in your book. Like, I don't want to be, you know, like, don't tease me, right? Because everyone, you know, there are all sorts of great ideas. I just need to know that you can complete a narrative.
Okay, cool. Katie?
Hi. So I was wondering your opinions on art styles. What is kind of the norm? Are there any no-nos for art styles that are going to make editors not want it? Just any thoughts about that?
So, okay, so my first thought is there are no no-nos. The second is that everyone has personal taste. You know, and some people, you know, some editors will, you know, feel your art and some won't. You know, there are, you know, when I was at Lion Forge, the people who own Lion Forge come from a very mainstream superhero comic sensibility. So they were always, you know, looking for stuff that looked like that. And I was always bringing in, you know, indie, which could be considered more literary art. And they let me do it, and those sold much better than the superhero comics. But, you know, so there's sort of like, you know, that dichotomy between essentially the mainstream comics market and sort of more the book trade market, although you've got places like Boom, you know, who are doing like, you know, Lumberjanes and Giant Days and stuff like that, that is a very much more indie style. But, you know, I will say, you know, when I look at pitches, I look at the art first, if they come with art, to see if I can read it well. And then I look at the story, and a really great story can carry sort of mediocre-ish or not like really super well executed art, but it doesn't work the other way around.
I cannot believe you're saying that. I've said that many times. I agree with you so completely.
No.
And it's kind of disturbing to me because I love art so much. I'm such a visual person and I can get so drawn into the artwork, but I 100% agree. The story is more important.
Yeah.
Art?
Hey.
Hey.
Okay, got it. So my question is, if you pitch a project as a writer and illustrator, do you ever have a situation where you're like, the art needs to be better and you would suggest maybe collaborating or something, or would something like that happen? Like the story's good, but the art's not quite there yet?
That's, you know, that's a tough one. And that hasn't happened to me that often. In fact, I can't think of a time that it's happened to me. They usually sort of go hand in hand. But it's also, if someone's pitching something as an author illustrator, I mean, the story's got to be really amazing. And generally, for it to be really amazing, it's got to be some kind of, like, the only scenario I can imagine is if it's a memoir about some sort of like really important or interesting event, you know, that then, you know, so, you know, you might suggest having them work with an artist on it. But, you know, I mean, it's got to be something that you feel like it needs to be published. Sorry, I know that doesn't help at all. That doesn't really answer the question.
That's okay.
So
It's all right.
Everybody, looks like I don't have any more hands raised. Nobody else has any more questions. Oh, somebody, yes. Okay, Gina. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering, I'm working in like early graphic novel territory. I'm a picture book author and illustrator already. What would you say are some common issues that you see with early graphic novel submissions?
I mean, it's so new. It's really new that it's, you know, it's so, you know, I guess I don't really have an answer for that. I will say, you know, you can see what I showed you before. They all seem to be lining up around sort of, you know, these basic concepts. So I tend to be looking for things that are a little different than that, because, you know, seeing how flooded the market is going to be with books about, you know, food that is friends with other food or animals that are friends with other animals, I'm looking for something that will maybe stand out. Does that help?
Thank you.
Awesome. Tintin, did you want to ask another question? You're muted.
Okay. There's a lot of new agents coming into graphic novels right now, and a lot of them are not, well, they're like, a few months ago on Twitter, someone said they don't actually read like scripts. They don't want to read comic scripts. So that caused some controversy. So there's a lot of new agents. You're dealing with a lot of new agents. How do you educate agents on is it necessary for an editor to kind of educate agents on what they need and what they want to see? Or, you know, how do you deal basically with new agents who are just getting into the field and don't quite know how to submit or maybe navigate the graphic novel market?
I mean, that's an interesting question. You know, I'm lucky enough at Little Brown that I'm getting enough submissions that, you know, I don't have to educate agents. It'll either be something that works or something that won't. And, you know, everyone's different, you know, and I'm not, you know, I've got like my ideal pitch, but I'm not going to be like, well, if it doesn't fit this criteria, I'm not going to look at it. So, you know, I think it's sort of up to them to educate themselves. A lot of agents will do this thing like where, like, I have phone calls with agents all the time where they'll just be like, hi, I'm starting to rep graphic novels. What are you looking for? And we'll talk about the kinds of books I want to publish. We're not generally talking about what I'm looking for in a pitch, which I think as agents, they probably already figure is they have some expertise in. I do just want to say that if you're talking to agents and you're thinking of signing up with one, it's a really good idea to ask around if anyone has had experience with that agent, because they're not all the best. And sometimes people have had bad experiences with agents, and I'm not, just ask around is what, don't just be like, oh, an agent wants to work with me, this is going to be great. And lots of them work independently, but a lot of them work for agencies. So it's good to sort of just Google if anything's been written about the agency, what people think about the agency. It's definitely important.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Ben Towell wants to raise his hand.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Hey there, sorry, I didn't think anybody wanted to see me cooking. Can you elaborate a little bit on, you mentioned that one good market right now that people were paying money for was non-memoir, non-fiction. What kind of stuff is that?
So, hold on, I'm looking. Like this, for instance, Ben.
That's a bunch of trash right there.
Yep. You guys know this book, this series that Ben illustrated, just re-released this spring. Anyway, basically these were books that were like really far, they were like 10 years before their time.
Yeah, they were too early.
Yes. But I love them so much. So, it's stuff like that. Like Nathan Hale kind of, broke up the market there. So historical fiction and historical nonfiction, for instance, I just signed up a book about the Tulsa race massacre. I think that's going to be really interesting. I think what has happened is that, gatekeepers, teachers, librarians have come around to graphic novels. And so now they're interested in putting, nonfiction graphic novels in front of kids. They figured out that people retain information better when they read it in a graphic format. But I'm also always looking for things that aren't, straight biographies. I mean, what's so amazing about this book and this whole series is that it's about Amelia Earhart, but this is about Amelia Earhart from the perspective of like a made-up, I assume she's a made-up character.
Yeah, she's made up.
Little girl running the newspaper on this part of, it was Newfoundland, right? Where
yes,
Amelia Earhart stopped before her transatlantic flight. So that's something that's unique. Like, I don't just want like a biography. There's another book in the series about Helen Keller that I think won in Eisner. Maybe it was that.
Yeah, if it didn't, it should have. That's Joe Lambert did that one.
Yes, and it's, I talk about that book a lot because that is just an amazing example of what the graphic format can do. He illustrates what it's like to be Helen Keller. And it's sort of like she's in this blackness. And then when she figures things out, sort of anyway, read it, pick it up. She sort of, you can see these things start to emerge once she's touched them and knows the word for them and knows the letters for them. It's amazing. I mean, the great thing about graphic novels is, and why they work well with history and nonfiction is that it can give you the feeling of sort of viscerally what it's like to be in someone's shoes the way that prose, I think, doesn't.
If you're gonna buy one of those, buy the Helen Keller one. Don't buy mine. The Helen Keller one is really good. Anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna buy both of them.
You should.
Okay, Rivka.
There you go. Hey, so do you have a wish list, and what would be your ultimate dream project?
Okay. I think my ultimate dream project would be something that I have no idea what it is right now. Something like super unique. But I really, really love like authentic contemporary stories, whether they're middle grade or YA. Those are sort of my absolute favorites. I'm always excited to publish memoir. I'm not, you know, I'm a big reader of fantasy and science fiction, but I'm not a big publisher of fantasy and science fiction. There, that can be really hard to break out because people have to invest in the world building, which they seem perfectly willing to do for movies, but not necessarily for books. You know, I'm just really interested in more authentic experiences. I have one that I'm working on now from someone I met when I went and visited SCAD, who was in a mass shooting at Umpqua Community College in Oregon. So it's, you know, it's in her experience, not only the actual experience, but sort of like healing from it afterwards. I'd like sort of more things like that. I would like more immigrant stories. The book that, I guess it was Dial, I think I don't have it right here, but the new Victoria Jameson book, When the Stars Are Scattered, is that it?
Oh yeah.
That she did with, you know, these two, I'm only halfway through it, two refugee, well, one of them co-wrote it with their refugee brothers. It's amazing. You know, I really want books that show kids what it's like to live in different, very different situations from the ones they live in, but also similar situations. So they can see that there are vast varieties of experience, but there's also someone who's had their experience too. That doesn't really count as a wish list. I know that's not what I would tell an agent necessarily. I'd be like, graphic novels, and they're like this, and I'm, you know, definitely want some middle grade, but that's, you know, as far as like the dream projects, like those are stories that I'm looking for.
And what about magical realism? Like having actual real world events, but having a fantastical twist? Because I haven't really seen that in graphic novels yet.
Well, I do have a few on my list that are magical realism. You know, I've got one that will be next spring. It's called Lilla, the Accidental Witch by Eleanor Cruz, who's an amazing English creator, whose memoir is going to be published by, adult memoir by Simon & Schuster. It's called The Times I Knew I Was Gay. And I think that comes out this fall. But it's, you know, it's a story of a little girl finding out that she's a witch and that there's magic in her family, and there's like a good witch and there's a bad witch, and, you know, who she has to defeat. But that is kind of, in a way, that's the window dressing, and it's really a story about her finding out that she's gay and how she deals with it and comes out to her family. So I'm fine with magical realism in the pursuit of an authentic story, you know, but I'm kind of done with publishing just stories that are just like a fun, crazy story. You know, like I can make up just this wacky thing. Like it's got to have more of a reason for being. Like Space Dumplings, which Scholastic did by Craig Thompson, is really, you know, about income inequality and, you know, just really statehood and things like that in sort of this sci-fi kind of romp package. And I think that's what the Five World series is turning out to be too, something, you know, similar to that.
Those are awesome.
Yeah.
What about humor? I'm just curious.
Humor's great. You know, I'm doing another book called The Princess and the Grilled Cheese Sandwich. It's taking a really long time, and it's it's sort of, I mean, imagine The Prince and the Dressmaker, but, you know, much, much funnier. And it's just like a super swoony middle grade love story, you know, about two female characters, and it's hilarious, and it's set in this kingdom where everything is about cheese. Yeah, humor is really fun, but you know, I don't want things just to be funny. It has to be something else too.
Well, I feel like you've given us so much of your time, and well, oh, Tintin, you did raise your hand. Want to ask one last question, Tintin?
Yes, really sorry. Yeah, one more. Does the author's nationality have any bearing? And this applies to me and a couple of other people on the chat. So, does the nationality affect acquisitions? Like,
I mean, in that we are very interested in acquiring authors who are not just cis straight white men. But those two, you guys. But yeah, I mean, you know, obviously, many of us have been thinking about this for many years, but certainly now, publishing in general is looking at their lists and hoping that we've been inclusive and diverse about it. So, I mean, yeah, it makes a difference. Certainly, I mean, like, for instance, the story about the Tulsa race massacre is by a Black woman cartoonist. Like, I'm not going to publish that story by a white cartoonist. You know, it's important to, even though it's not like she was there, she's not from Tulsa, but it's important that people have a connection to what they're working on too.
okay, but I'm talking about like non-Americans. Can they publish in American publishing industry?
Yeah, why not? Absolutely.
Okay.
Princess Two Sandwiches by a Brazilian.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
So I gave you this whole answer that was not to the question you asked, but
I know, actually, I'm glad that you said what you did.
Okay.
I'm glad. Okay. Everybody, thank you so much. So the next meetup is 1 month from now. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Andrea.
Yeah, it was so exciting to see you all, and I'm so excited to see, like,
I know, it's so fun to see everybody here. I'm so sad that we can't all be drinking a coffee or having a beer together. We'll do it together eventually.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I'm gonna scroll through and say hi to everybody too. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye, my friends, Jonah and Greg and Frank. So excited to see all of you.
I know. It feels bittersweet. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.